Well, as we begin a new series today, I'm reminded of these very famous and wise words. Life is a highway. I want to drive it all night long. Yeah, I see people singing it. I thought about singing it, and maybe, hey, let's sing it together, but then I thought more wisely of it. But I think Tom Cochran has something there. Life is a highway, isn't it? It's kind of like this journey that we're all on. And I don't know a single person who doesn't want to ride it well, to live it well. We all want to live this journey well. We all want to ride or drive this highway of life well. We want to find direction. We want to find purpose. We want to find meaning. Now, some kind of take off ramps when they shouldn't, or maybe they stay on a route that they should be taking an off ramp on. Maybe they're headed in the wrong direction. Maybe they go off the side of the road completely. But every one of us intends to live this life well and to find meaning and to find purpose and to find direction. And that's exactly what the book of Proverbs is all about. How to live life well. How to live life wisely. And so we're going to spend the next 7 weeks or so in the book of Proverbs, looking at some of these Proverbs. And what do we need to know before we kind of jump into the specific proverb that we're going to be looking at today? What do we need to know about the overview of Proverbs? Just there's a lot, but here's just a few of the main things. Written mostly by King Solomon, and probably many of you know that. He didn't write all of the book of Proverbs. He didn't write all of the Proverbs. We know that chapter 30 was the sayings of this man named Agur. And then chapter 31, it says, is written by King Lemuel, which we actually believe is a non-Israelite because of some of the language he uses and how he writes. But most of the Proverbs were by King Solomon, or at least compiled and put together in what we know as the book of Proverbs in the scriptures. The very first verse of Proverbs says, the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. And a lot of us know sort of a little bit of the background of King Solomon. We know that he asked for wisdom, and God granted him wisdom, and he's kind of known as the wisest person to ever live, at least for a portion of his life, and that he was extremely rich. And it talks about this in 1 Kings chapter 4, but it also says this in verse 32, he spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. So many of these proverbs that he spoke were written down, and hundreds of them in the book of Proverbs. These proverbs are just short, clever sayings that offer wisdom for living, wisdom for this highway of life that we're on. Proverbs is considered one of the 3 books of wisdom literature in the scriptures. There are 3 wisdom books: Job, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes. And maybe you've heard this. Maybe you've heard Proverbs described as kind of the book of promises. Have you heard that before? This is kind of the book of promises. Well, Proverbs should not be considered promises. They're not promises of God, more like probabilities. And let me talk about that a little bit. Proverbs are general principles of life. When we live wisely, things generally go well. When we live foolishly, things generally don't go well. There are exceptions, though, right? Here are some verses. Proverbs 22:6. Start children off the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it. We all know people who have grown up, and they've grown up in a Christian home, and now they've kind of strayed off the path. They've taken an exit ramp. That's an exception to the rule, right? Proverbs 10:27, the fear of the Lord adds length to life, but the years of the wicked are cut short. We all know people who fear the Lord, love the Lord, are following Jesus, and their lives are cut short, maybe drastically. And we all know people who are not living for the Lord that maybe live long lives and they prosper. And So Proverbs are more general, the general rules, the probabilities, not the exceptions. Now, Ecclesiastes and Job kind of talk a little bit more about the exceptions to the rule. We know Job is about, how, sometimes bad things happen to good people. But Proverbs is all about the general rule, not the exception. What's the purpose of the book of Proverbs? The purpose is for gaining wisdom. That's the main theme of the book of Proverbs. First two verses, the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, for gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight. And the word wisdom is used at least 39 times in just 31 chapters in the book of Proverbs. Wisdom, that's the main theme. So what is wisdom? What is wisdom? When you think about wisdom, what comes to mind? For me, it's the wise old owl. I don't know why. Does anybody know why owls are wise? I'm not really sure, but I picture this, you always see the owl with the graduation cap, and this picture, it's on a stack of books, this owl that is very, very smart, but this picture doesn't really make a lot of sense to me because book smart isn't the same as wise. There's a difference between knowledge, gaining information, retaining information and facts, and actually being wise. Wisdom is doing something with what you know, doing the things that you know to be true. And so the Hebrew word for wisdom means sensible, it means prudent, showing thought for the future. And this is really key, knowing that today your actions will determine your future destination. And that is so important to know, especially if you're younger. Your current actions today, what you're doing today, will determine your future destination. So wisdom is practical. Wisdom is applied knowledge or skill, living what you know. Jesus tells this very famous parable in the Sermon on the Mount about someone who's wise. Therefore, everyone who hears these words, the knowledge, takes it in, and puts them into practice, is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. This is a wise foundation, and so we're kind of mixing metaphors a little bit. You've got the wise foundation of the house, but you're also headed in the right direction down the highway through wisdom, through wise living. And so throughout the next 7 weeks, we're going to look at some of these little nuggets of wisdom in the book of Proverbs. Hopefully gain some wisdom for living. And here's where we start. This has got to be the place that we start. Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. The fear of the Lord is the beginning, is the foundation of wisdom. When you fear the Lord, when you have a proper fear of the Lord, you get the most out of life. When you fear the Lord, you live the way God intended for you to live. So what does it mean to have a healthy and a proper fear of the Lord? What does it mean to fear the Lord? Let's talk about that a bit this morning. First of all, to fear the Lord is to understand who He is. And so at this point, I don't even want to try to describe who He is. I mean, can we really fully, truly understand who God is? I don't even want to try. So let's let the Scriptures speak towards this. And we read it throughout the Scriptures, who God is, what God is like. I just picked out a few examples. Deuteronomy 10:17. For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality and accepts no bribes. Psalm 147:5, great is our Lord and mighty, mighty in power. His understanding has no limits. There's no limits to his wisdom, to his understanding. Nehemiah 9:6, you alone are the Lord. You made the heavens, even the highest heavens, and all their starry host, the earth and all that is on it, the seas and all that is in them. You give life to everything. You give life to everything, and the multitudes of heaven even worship you. The multitudes of heaven worshiping God. Isaiah 40, verse 28, do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary. I'm tired already, and the day's just started. I need to take a nap. He will never grow tired or weary, and his understanding has no one can fathom. And we could go on and on and on. And the prophet Isaiah caught this glimpse of heaven, this vision of heaven. And I just want to read about that for a second in Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Isaiah sees this vision of heaven, God on the throne. And in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. Wouldn't that be cool to see the Lord high and exalted, seated on a throne? And the train of his robe filled the temple, and above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. And John actually catches the same sort of vision of the throne room in heaven. He writes about it in Revelation chapter 4, and you can go ahead and read that on your own this week. Read Revelation chapter 4 and read about the glimpse that he caught of the throne room of heaven. But I do want to read some more words that John wrote in Revelation chapter 1. Starting with verse 12. I turned around to see the voice that was speaking to me, and when I turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands, and among the lampstands was someone like a son of man, dressed in a robe, reaching down to his feet, and with a golden sash around his chest. The hair on his head was white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like blazing fire. His feet were like bronze glowing in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of rushing waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars. And coming out of his mouth was a sharp double-edged sword. His face was like the sun, shining in all its brilliance. And when I saw him, I fell at his feet. As though dead. Then he placed his right hand on me and said, do not be afraid. I am the first, and I am the last. I have some wise words for you here. These are my words, and these are extremely wise. God is God. I know, you're thinking, wow, that's pretty incredible. That's pretty wise. But think about it. Reflect on that. God is God. He's God. God is creator. God is sovereign. God is sustainer. God is above all things. He's seated on his throne. God is God. To fear the Lord is to understand who he is. And when we understand who he is, it should lead us to tremendous reverence and awe. And understanding who God is should lead us to pursue him in worship. And that's not just singing songs together on a Sunday morning. That's live lives that worship him because he is God. So to fear the Lord is to understand who he is, but to fear the Lord is also to understand who we are. In light of who he is, then who are we? See, when Isaiah caught that vision of heaven, that glimpse of heaven, the throne room of heaven, what did he say? Do you know what he said afterwards? He said this, Woe to me! Woe to me! I cried, I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. And I think we need to have more woe to me moments, because God is God. God is God. And so here's another nugget of wisdom for you. If God is God, then I am not. And if God is creator, then I am not. If God is in charge, then I am not in charge. I'm not in charge. Having a healthy fear of God is to understand that He determines good and evil. He determines right from wrong. Proverbs 3:19 says, by wisdom the Lord laid the earth's foundations. By understanding He set the heavens in place. He is the source of wisdom. He's the source of all wisdom. I am not. And this is what Adam and Eve lost sight of in the garden. They lost their proper fear of God, their creator, and who they were, His creation. They sought to do things their way. They sought to define good and evil on their terms, to define wisdom on their terms, to do things their way. They sought to become gods of their own making, to become wise in their own eyes. And where did that lead them? That led them from a proper and healthy fear of God to being afraid of God and running from Him. And hiding from Him in the garden because of their sin. Instead of pursuing Him in worship, they were running from Him. They were scared of Him. And so, for those who aren't following Jesus, this makes sense. Those who really haven't experienced forgiveness of their sin through Jesus, it makes sense that you would be afraid of God. You know, you hear things like, if I stepped foot in that church building, I'd be struck dead. You know, they have this picture, this vision of God, that he's someone who's out to get them. And that makes sense because you're just exalting self as God. You're a God of your own making. You're a God unto yourself. And instead of having a reverence and awe that draws you to your Creator, you're running from Him and you're hiding from Him, and you're following your own way over His way. But thankfully, those of us who know Him and trust Him and understanding who He is, understanding who we are in light of who our Creator is, leads us to humility and should lead us to pursue His way over our way, because it's His wisdom and He's the source of wisdom, and He knows what's best, not me. To fear the Lord is to understand who He is. To fear the Lord is to understand who we are. And finally, to fear the Lord is to understand that this is His world. And you probably all know the story of Jesus calming the storm. It's an incredible story. It's one of my favorites. We can read about it in, I think, 3 of the Gospels. And in Mark chapter 4, we read that, there was just this furious storm. The disciples are crossing the Sea of Galilee, and there's just this furious storm. A squall came up, it says, and the waves are crashing over the sides of the boat. It's dark out because it's evening. It says the boat was nearly swamped. They were scared to death. And it had to have been a really bad storm for fishermen like these to be frightened in that way. I mean, they're scared out of their minds. They think they're going to be shipwrecked. They think they're going to be drowned. And they find Jesus, and Jesus is sleeping. And I want to read from Mark chapter 4, verse 38. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. I like that. He's all comfortable. He's just sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drowned?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." And that was it. Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." And I like how Young's translation puts it. Young's, as I've mentioned before, is the literal word-for-word translation from the Greek to English language. And they feared a great fear. And they feared a great fear. In other words, they were no longer afraid of the storm. Instead of being afraid of the storm, they had fear of the one who calmed the storm. They had fear of the one who can control nature. Pretty incredible. And throughout the scriptures, we just see it over and over and over again. Fear not, do not be afraid. Fear not, do not be afraid. Fear not, do not be afraid. Over and over and over again. And it says in Psalm 27:1, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? You see, there is so much fear today. So much fear and worry and anxiety and depression. There are so many people living in fear, living on this highway of fear, and they can't find the off-ramp. And I don't want to make light of these things because these are a big deal. They're a big deal, and people need to seek professional help for these things. But here is where we start. You see, when you can truly see God for who he is, your fear of everything else will fade. Fearing the Lord, understanding who he is, understanding that this is his world, and he is in control, and he is sovereign, truly understanding that will lead us to fear not. There's nothing else to fear. We have nothing to fear because this is his world. So, when Adam and Eve were banished from the garden and they were exiled from the garden, do you think they looked back at their time in the garden? I think they did. I think they looked back and they thought, man, we had it so well. Things were so good for us. We were walking with our Creator and talking with our Creator. We experienced a relationship with our Creator. We experienced the presence of God. We had it so good. Our Creator was right all along. His way was better than our way. We knew that. But in trying to gain wisdom on our own terms, we were so foolish. And what about King Solomon? Maybe you know the story of King Solomon, and the wisest man who ever lived, at least at some point in his life, and so wise, and he wrote thousands of proverbs. At the end of his life, what did he say? Life is just meaningless. It's because he ended up straying from the path. He didn't continue following the way of wisdom. He didn't live what he knew to be the Lord's way. And when Jesus, described this wise builder, he also described a foolish builder. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came and the streams rose and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. Maybe you're a believer. You're a Christian or a follower of Jesus, and you know what to do. Knowledge is not the issue here. You have the scriptures. You read the scriptures. You study the scriptures. You sit through sermons week after week. You read. You listen to podcasts. The problem is not knowledge. For you, maybe there's not much doing. There's not much applied knowledge. There's not much wise living. Maybe that's the case for you. And maybe that's the case for various reasons. Maybe you've been distracted by other things. You've kind of veered off in the wrong direction. Or maybe you're paralyzed by fear and you can't find the off-ramp. You're living for self. You're doing what's wise in your own eyes. And you're realizing there's no meaning to that. There's no meaning in that. Well, this is where you start. This is where you start to get back on track. The fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord is the beginning, the foundation of wisdom. This is how you get back on track. Regain a proper and healthy fear of the Lord. Because when we fear the Lord, we truly understand who He is. Who He is, that He is God, He is Creator. To really understand that will lead you and me into a life of worship, of pursuing Him down life's highway, living lives that honor and glorify Him. And we'll understand who we are in light of who He is. That we are His creation. He is the Creator. We are His creation. And really understanding that will help us, will lead us to live His way and not ours, not our way. And when we really fear the Lord, we'll understand that this world is His world. He created this world. It's His wisdom that laid the foundations of this world that we live in. And understand that will lead us to not fear anything else and continue down the path in His direction, living wisely. A healthy fear of the Lord will keep us on track, living His way wisely. And so maybe for you, you're realizing for the first time, maybe you're realizing for the first time who God is and who you are. And you're understanding that there is such a huge separation there. And there's a separation there because of your sin. And you're realizing that for the first time you are separated from your Creator because of your sin. He's holy and He's perfect and He's separate from you. Maybe you've been on the run. You've been in hiding. You've been afraid of Him because of your sin. You need to know that that's why Jesus came. Jesus came to bridge that gap. God with us, to make a way through His sacrifice, through His forgiveness, to make a way for you to be in relationship with your Creator again, to experience His presence in your life. That Jesus bridges that gap. So when you repent from your way of living to doing His way and you put your trust in Him, here's what you'll realize. You'll realize that He has been pursuing you all along. And now you can have a healthy fear and a reverence and an awe of your Creator that draws you to Him in worship. A life of worship. A life of wisdom. I want us to continue the conversation beyond this morning, maybe over lunch, maybe sometime this week, maybe it's with a spouse or with a family member or a friend, or maybe it's with your community group. Here are some questions that we can wrestle with this week. In what area of your life are you lacking wisdom? I mean, think about it. In what area of your life are you lacking wisdom? What often distracts or gets you sidetracked from doing what you know you should do? What fears are keeping you paralyzed from doing what you know you should? And how might the fear of the Lord keep you moving in his direction? Some questions for us to wrestle with this week. You can write those down now, or you can go back and check the video out later and copy them down. But continue the conversation throughout the week.